Welcome back to Strides to Solutions. I'm Esther Adams. Let me describe something that has probably happened to you. You are standing at the inn gate. Your heart is going faster than usual. There is something electric happening in your chest, a kind of sharp humming alertness. Your hands feel warm. Your breathing is a little quicker. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a very familiar thought forms. I'm nervous. Something is wrong. Here is what I want to offer you today. That thought, that specific interpretation, may be the most expensive habit in your entire writing life. Not because the feeling is wrong, but because the label you just put on it is costing you something real, something measurable, something the research can actually trace. Because that activation you just felt, it has no inherent emotional meaning, none. The racing heart, the heightened alertness, the quickened breath, those are autonomic events. Your body mobilizing resources, sharpening your perception, preparing you for something that matters to you. Whether that activation becomes anxiety or readiness, threat or fuel, obstacle or advantage, that does not depend on the physiology. It depends on the label you apply to it. And that label is not fixed. It is a skill. It can be learned, practiced, and genuinely changed. That is what this episode is about. Researchers use the term interoception to describe the brain's ongoing process of sensing and interpreting signals from inside the body, the cardiovascular system, the viscera, the musculature. There is an entire ascending neural pathway dedicated to this. Signals travel from peripheral sensors throughout your body, up through the brainstem, and into the insula and anterior cingulate cortex, where raw bodily data gets converted into felt experience, where my heart is beating fast becomes, depending on the frame, either I am ready or I am falling apart. The neuroscientist A.D. Craig described the anterior insula as the cortical substrate of the felt sense of the body, the place where the raw signal becomes subjective experience. And the distance between those two things, the raw signal and the experience of it, is not trivial. That distance is actually where your performance lives. Because here's what the research establishes and what almost nobody tells writers directly. Your body is not generating noise before a competition. It is generating information. The tightening in your stomach is data. The warmth in your hands is data. The slight shortening of your breath is data. The question is not how to stop receiving those signals. The question is whether you are reading them accurately or whether you are reflexively reaching for the nearest available label and calling it a day. Most writers reach for the label, and the label is almost always some version of nervous. Now, here is where contemporary neuroscience adds something that genuinely changes the picture. The brain does not simply receive interoceptive signals and report them objectively. It runs something more like a continuous prediction process. Your brain generates an expectation of what your body should be feeling in a given situation, checks that expectation against the actual incoming signals, and produces a felt experience that is a weighted blend of the two: prediction and signal, expectation and sensation. What this means in practice is sobering. If you have spent years arriving at showgrounds and labeling the activation as anxiety, your brain has built a strong prior expectation. This environment means threat. And so the next time you arrive, your heart rate picks up, which could mean anything. And the brain, running its prediction, says, "We know what this is. We have been here before. This is anxiety." The experience of threat is produced not only by your physiology, but by the weight of every previous label you have applied to that physiology. The prior is not permanent. That is the critical part. Experimental evidence shows that the brain's predictions about bodily states can be modified through deliberate labeling practice, through reappraisal training, and through repeated experiences that build alternative interpretations. The prior is changeable, and changing it produces real effects on subjective experience, on physiology, and on performance. Research on arousal reappraisal is specific about this. When people interpret physiological activation as excitement or readiness rather than anxiety, even when the activation is physically identical, the downstream effects are measurably different. More efficient cardiovascular profiles, lower cortisol, better performance outcomes across evaluative contexts. This is not positive thinking dressed up in scientific language. The mechanism is neurological. The label you apply engages prefrontal semantic circuits that change the action tendency that follows. Anxious signals threat and prompts avoidance or contraction. Ready signals mobilization and prompts approach. The body is doing the same thing in both cases. The label sends the brain down a different road. For riders who have been told their entire careers that pre competition nerves are a problem to manage or suppress or push through, this is a meaningful reframe. The activation is not the problem, the interpretation is. But I want to go one level deeper, because this is where the research gets really practically useful. Most riders collapse the entire pre competition internal landscape into one undifferentiated category called nerves. And that collapse, that flattening, is actually part of what makes the experience so hard to work with. Researchers study something called emotional granularity, the capacity to make fine grained distinctions among different internal states rather than lumping them all together under a single broad label. And the research on this is consistent and striking. Higher emotional granularity is associated with more effective emotion regulation, not because people with high granularity choose better strategies, but because they are working with better information about what actually needs regulating. Think about what that means concretely. I am nervous points toward nothing specific and everything simultaneously. It tends to generate global dread or rumination or a frantic search for a generic calming technique. But I am worried about that combination fence, that point somewhere. It suggests a specific preparation response. It is actionable. I am a little under recovered from this week is different information than I am uncertain about my position in the canter pirouette, which is different again from I am genuinely excited about competing with this horse today. These are not simply different ways of saying the same thing, they are different qualities of information, and different information produces different, better, more targeted responses. Developing this kind of granularity is not vocabulary expansion. It requires something that performance culture in equestrian sport has historically discouraged, actually attending to what is happening inside before deciding what it means. We are taught to push through, to not let the horse feel that we are nervous, to override. And the research is fairly clear that this is precisely backwards. Emotion suppression tends to increase the physiological arousal it attempts to hide, and it depletes exactly the cognitive resources you need to ride well. A rider who has been trained to override her internal signals arrives at the gate with less information about her own state, not more control over it. There is a psychologist named Eugene Gendlin who spent decades studying what he called the felt sense, the pre-verbal, holistic, whole-body experience of a situation that exists before any label is applied to it. His argument, which converging neuroscience research has since supported, was that effective regulation requires attending to the felt sense before reaching for a concept, not to avoid labeling, but to ensure the label you eventually apply actually fits what is there, rather than fitting what you expected to find. The practical version of this does not require a meditation retreat. It takes about 30 seconds. Before entering the warm-up ring, instead of immediately asking yourself whether you are nervous and answering with whatever thought arrives first, you pause, you notice. Where is the tension in the body? Is it held or is it fluid? What does the energy in the chest actually feel like if you stay with it for a moment without naming it? Is it tight and contracting or is it alive and forward? Those are different things. They call for different responses. And the only way to know which one you are actually dealing with is to look before you label. This habit, attending accurately before labeling reflexively, is trainable. Research on interoceptive training shows meaningful improvements through body scan practice, mindfulness of breath, deliberate heartbeat perception, and what researchers call emotional granularity practice, which simply means taking any felt state and asking, can I describe this more precisely? Each of those practices builds a different component of the same skill, and the neural substrate of these improvements is real. Plasticity in anterior insula connectivity with the prefrontal cortex, the circuits that link bodily sensing to cognitive regulation. There is also something worth naming specifically for riders. Physical activity itself improves interoceptive accuracy, independent of any deliberate attentional training, and the proprioceptive demands of horsemanship, the constant, fine tuned adjustment of weight, breath, and posture in response to a sensitive, dynamic animal, may be building interoceptive capacity in ways that nobody has formally measured yet, but that are entirely consistent with what the research predicts. The practice of feeling focused riding, attending to what the horse is doing beneath you, rather than running through a checklist of technical corrections, is simultaneously horsemanship and interoceptive training. These are not separate things. What all of this points toward is something the research describes as perceptual control over internal states, not the ability to control what your nervous system does. You cannot stop your amygdala from firing when the stakes are real, but the ability to perceive what it is doing with enough accuracy and differentiation to respond deliberately rather than reactively, to read the signal before deciding what it means, to apply a label that opens up options rather than closes them down. The rider who has developed this skill does not arrive at the gate without nerves. She arrives with nerves she can read, and that is a genuinely different situation. There is a version of competition preparation that treats every pre competition signal as a problem requiring suppression. And there is a version that treats those same signals as information, data from a highly calibrated system that knows the stakes are real and is preparing accordingly. The difference between those two versions is not in the signals themselves. It is in the perceptual apparatus the rider brings to them, and that apparatus is buildable. Your nervous system is already telling you what you need to know before every single competition. The question is whether you have developed the skill to hear it accurately, or whether you have been applying the same blunt, reflexive label for so long that the real signal stopped getting through. Everything I have talked about today is drawn from the research in my new book, The Amateur's Edge: The Psychology of the Amateur Equestrian Brain, available now on Amazon. The link is in the show notes. This book is for the writer who is done with generic advice and wants to understand what is actually happening in the brain, in the body, in the nervous system, and what to do about it with some precision. Because you have been calling it nerves for long enough, it might be time to find out what it actually is. I am Esther Adams. This is Strides to Solutions.